my name is Veronica, and today I'm going to be talking about the 16 books that I read in April. I finally got back into fantasy this month, and I'm so happy. And I continued on in a series that I started last month, and it just was getting better and better. The first book that I read was Haunting Adeline. I finally picked this up. I feel like this is just a staple in the dark romance community, and it was actually one of my 26 books that I wanted to read in 2026, and I just felt it one day. This is about Zaid and Adeline, and I've just been hearing so many things about him being like the ultimate stalker. Honestly, when I was reading this book, I was more invested in the mystery element in the book outside of like their relationship and all the other crazy things that were going on. I was really also more invested in the beginning part of the book rather than the latter part of the book. I just feel like it really started focusing more on Spice and more of their physical relationship. And again, I was more interested in the mystery. I will say who the person ended up being, I was actually shocked by that. Like, I did not see that coming at all. And then the ending, I felt like was pretty predictable. I was told that that was going to be like a major cliffhanger and to have the second book on hand, but based on the way that I felt about this first book, I didn't think that it was necessary to read the second. I am glad that I finally picked it up though, and I can truly understand why so many people either love or hate this book. I next picked up The Fake Out by Stephanie Archer. I actually picked up this book probably about a year or two ago and only got about 40% in and put it down, but I kept thinking about the main male character Rory and knew that I wanted to go back to the story. I also have read other books within the series and have really enjoyed it, and just seeing them within those books made me want to go back to their story. I will say that when I read it, I don't feel like I enjoyed it as much as I did the first time. While Rory was still a really, really good, amazing male main character, and I really, really loved him, and Hazel was a strong female main character, I feel like the issue that we were having within the story that caused him the fake date was not really doing it for me. Like, I understood that the guy that she was with previously was horrible to her, but her then having this huge issue with it years and years later was just not believable to me. And I really was just like losing interest within the story because that was the reason behind it. I did like that this was still based with their hockey team and being able to see characters that were going to have stories later on and be able to really get like a peek into the coach. That's the last book that's in the series. And I will say, like, I really did enjoy it for what it was. Fake dating is one of my favorite trips to read about, and I feel like outside of that, that was done very well. Again, it was just the reason for them fake dating I didn't really like. And I also feel like it was pretty obvious that Rory had had a thing for Hazel for so many years, and her just not seeing that and not believing that she was, you know, desirable to anybody. I didn't really love to see like that type of dynamic, but I am so excited to continue this series, and I'm so excited to read the last book within it. I then picked up The Night Prince, which is the second book to The Wolf King. This book, ooh, it was so good. So good. Like, literally just look at the tabs. Like, let that tell you how much I enjoyed this book. I read this book, I think, in a day, 2 days, something like that, really, really quickly. I will say the very first, like, 40% of this book, it kind of felt like the first book to me, and I was like, oh, okay, like, this is interesting, I'm intrigued, but you're not gripping me. The last 60% literally was just, I could not put this book down. I was so intrigued. I just kept flipping pages, like I wanted to know what was going on. And then Blake in this book, I literally had already liked him, but he solidified my feelings for how much I loved him in this story. And I feel like a lot of things that were happening in it, I was able to predict, and it was kind of foreshadowed really well. And then other things that happened within it, I was literally mind boggled. There were things that I was just not expecting from this story. And then the way that it ended, I felt like it was a good stopping point. And I feel like there's just still so many things that can be explored within the third book that comes out later this year. I really was enjoying, again, the story and just the elements that were within this. I feel like this is such an easy read, and even though both of these books are about like 500 pages, they don't feel like it. It really feels like I'm reading like a 200, 300 page book because of the author's writing and the way that you can get so easily engrossed within her stories. And then I was feeling a mystery, and mysteries are some of the books that I don't read that often, but I am a true crime girly, and I love reading books about true crime or them having an element of mystery. And the next book that I picked up was Not Quite Dead Yet by Holly Jackson. And I've been seeing some things on this story. I just knew that I wanted to finish A Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy first before I picked this up. And I'm glad I did, because I got an understanding of kind of the way that she will tell a story. I feel like she does such a good job of like having a very badass female main character that is literally going to do everything she can do to figure out a mystery. And within this book, what I really love is that Jet, the female main character, was actually an older character. She was 27, and basically on Halloween night she gets attacked and finds out that she has a week to live, and within that week she's trying to figure out who essentially was trying to murder her and why she was being targeted. And I feel like having that be the stake was such an interesting concept. I've literally never seen that in a book. And just seeing to like this character having to advocate for herself, her literally being like a ball buster and not taking no for an answer, doing all these things to make sure that, you know, like once I'm gone, this mystery is solved and I can have peace. And honestly, I really loved the book. I thought the pacing was good. I again really loved Jet as a female main character. I really enjoyed like where the story went. I will say that I was able to kind of predict like who was involved, but it was kind of closer to the end. I feel like she did such a good job with like giving suspects, and there being, you know, the typical obvious ones, and then the ones where you don't want to believe that they would have anything to do with it, but they seem like they would be a very logical suspect. I will say that I feel like the story did end very abruptly, and I didn't necessarily love that. I wish that what happened at the end was explored just a little bit more because of how strong the rest of the story was. But I will say throughout that entire story, like I was intrigued. I was wanting to figure it out along with her. I was rooting for her. I was just loving the tenacity that she had about really wanting to solve her murder or potential murder, and making sure that like I'm going to be my own advocate. And obviously like when that happens to people, they're never able to see the outcome of like what happens, and her being able to be like the police was really cool. And then I picked up a book that I was really highly anticipating. It is the sequel to Bad Bishop, that is Twisted Pawn. And this was following characters that were mentioned within the previous book that had this dynamic where I was so interested in seeing like why they basically hated each other. So this is about Achilles and Tyranny, and they basically had this like crazy relationship when they were younger where they were each other's first love, and they end up breaking up, and you don't really know like why that happened. You just know that it was a huge fallout. And within Bad Bishop, you see that Achilles is basically dictating a lot of Tyranny's life, that being who she dates, who she hangs out with, where she lives, and having like this detail or like bodyguards following her around and reporting all of her moves to him. And so going into this book, I thought that the dynamic would be super interesting because obviously they don't have a really good relationship. It's very contentious, and you could just tell, especially within the first story, that they really were having issues. Going into this, I was really intrigued to see like Tyranny's viewpoint on this, why they were having the problems that they were having, and just basically like why there was this like long period of time where they just didn't communicate. And so going into this, I don't know if I had too high of expectations or because I love Bad Bishop so much, I was just expecting more. I honestly really didn't like it. I didn't really love the dynamic between the two of these characters. I thought the pacing was off a lot. There are a lot of times where I was really invested in what was going on, and then I would easily lose interest once we moved from that topic. I felt like there was a lot going on in the story, and there was no central plot line. Like we would go into one thing and then we'd move away from it, and then we'd go into another thing and then move away from it, and there was just no flow to me personally. So I feel like that kept taking me out of the story, and when there was an interesting development, I don't feel like we stayed in it long enough for me to care. So that's why I gave this book the rating that I did. I did see that she actually announced a third book, and I'm so excited for that because there were breadcrumbs of these characters within the second book, and that's kind of where my mind was going. And if you know, you know. I am so like intrigued to see what's going to go on with that, and I definitely will be continuing this series by her. And then I was still in a Mafia mood, and since that really didn't scratch the itch that I was looking for, I decided, you know what, I'm going to pick up the Maddest Obsession. This is what I wanted Twisted Pawn to do. I'd heard everybody and their mother and their father and their uncle and their dog say how much they loved this book, and people were not wrong. Christian Allister, I understand the hype around him. Gianna, I don't really know why she's not talked about more, because I loved her as a female main character. I thought she was very dynamic, and I thought there was a lot to her that was kind of almost overshadowed within The Sweetest Oblivion, obviously because that wasn't her story. But what was going on in this, I was intrigued literally the entire time. I read it in a day. I could not put it down. I was so like obsessed with their dynamic and just the way that they would talk to each other and interact, and they were talking to each other honestly way more than I expected. I didn't think that they were having these type of relations as early as they were, and seeing Gianna in her own POV and then Christian talking about her, I just loved seeing the way that he really, really cared about her and was there for her, and just her also dealing with like these issues that she had, and seeing that there was way more to the story than what was adhered to or talked about within The Sweetest Oblivion. Again, I just enjoyed even like the past perspective and the way that this book was laid out. I just thought the author did such a good job with the characters, and just even bringing in like previous characters and seeing like what their life is like, and getting another, you know, viewpoint into the mafia from somebody else's lens was really, really nice. I am so excited for the third book. I've heard that a lot of people also really like that one, and I know that this switches to a different mafia group, and I'm really intrigued to see like what these characters are going to be like and the dynamic within that story. And I continue with Mafia with The Predator. I decided that I'm finally going to start this series this year. This is also another book that was on my 26 books in 2026, this and The Predator. And since I was feeling Mafia, and I had actually started this book probably about 2 years ago and didn't get very far, I decided to pick it up again. I actually listened to a good chunk of this on the audiobook, and I feel like that was the best thing for it, because I remember as I was originally reading it, there's a lot of inner monologue in this story, because we are in Marana's point of view. That's the female main character. And because she's reflecting on a lot of the things that are going on within the story, and her feelings about the mafia, and her feelings about her family, and the main male character, you're really in her head a lot. And I remember when I was originally reading that, that was really taking me out of the story. So listening to the audiobook helped a lot, because I was having somebody, you know, tell me what was going on instead of me reading it for myself, and I feel like that kept me more engrossed within the story. I do remember like a lot of the things that were originally happening in this, and being able to read it again, they were just as interesting and like crazy and chaotic as I remember. And then the ending of the story was so like gut-wrenching. It's not something that I expected at all. I really felt for the characters within the story, and just the things that were going on with them in the world that they lived in, and really how I feel like that shaped them as people, and why they struggle, you know, to communicate currently and trust people, and, you know, divulge information because of the world that they live in, and the things that, you know, were either like stolen for them, or the innocence that they lost, or just not being able to really trust people within the circle that they're within. And this just made me even more intrigued for the second book. I can't wait to pick it up. Then I switched gears and said that I had to get back into romance, so I picked up Made for Each Other by Lynn Painter. This is about Abby and I think his name is Declan. I think that's right, Declan. And Abby is like this maid that basically like cleans these really expensive houses, and she also works at a grocery store. And Declan is a billionaire, millionaire that works kind of like within tech and like something else. Honestly, it was really unrealistic. I just wanted a romance book where I was going to be able to just really turn my brain off and just be in the story. And this was one of the books by Lynn Painter that I hadn't read yet. And I know it was basically like broadcasted as being like made for Manhattan, and I feel like that's a pretty accurate description. I feel like it followed a lot of like what that movie is like, in that you have this person that's really trying to make ends meet and is trying to, you know, support themselves, and then you have somebody that's, I wouldn't even say out of touch with reality, but that has so much money that they are just kind of like throwing it at everything and are not really taking into consideration like how much something costs. I will say that throughout this book, I did really enjoy their dynamic. I thought that they were a really cute couple. I loved like kind of the reasoning behind why they started fake dating, even though it was like absolutely outrageous and would never happen. I thought that it was kind of funny, and just seeing them be able to, you know, develop this relationship with somebody that they never expected to have a relationship with, and the dynamic that they had, and just seeing them both like trust in each other and learn to, you know, divulge things to each other, and Also, kind of like some of the issues that they were having and hang-ups, those being resolved in the way that they were talked about, I felt like it was done really well. I continued then with the red card, which is by Maren Moore. This is a rugby romance set in, I think it was in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. I was gonna say I didn't know that there was rugby in New Hampshire. I don't really think that there is, but that is not a sports romance book that I've literally ever read about, and sports romance is literally one of my favorite subgenres of romance ever. So getting to read a rugby romance was really interesting. This is about Killian and Rory. And Rory is the daughter of the coach of the rugby team. And Killian is a guy that comes from London that basically gets a red card in rugby and is removed from his team and is put onto this team because he is trying to get into whatever like the majors is for rugby. I don't even remember what that is. But I will say that the issues that were going on within this book that Killian was dealing with mainly were explored very well and talked about in a manner where I felt like it made a lot of sense as to why he was struggling and why he had issues. He basically, like I said, got the red card, and he got it because his mom had passed away tragically, and that was somebody that he was extremely close to. And so after that, he started spiraling, and it led to him having a lot of issues within his personal life and within his rugby career. So that's how he ends up at this other school. And I thought that his dynamic with Rory was really, really good. I loved the way that they were able to confide in each other and the way that they were speaking to each other. I just thought that it was really wholesome. And just seeing the way that she was able to help him realize that he was having demons and that it's okay to have that. And you don't necessarily have to get over a death in a certain amount of time. And you dealing with it years and years later is okay. You just want to try to have a more healthy mechanism of coping with it, and it was definitely something that he was still struggling with, and it was pretty obvious that it was still bleeding into his day-to-day life. I do again love like the way that the author explored that topic within this book, and just the dynamics that the characters had, and the way that Killian especially grew as a character. I feel like you could see that he was working really hard on like his mental health and trying to express himself in a better manner and just confiding in people. I thought that was really good. I also loved later on the teen dynamics within this book. I thought that it was very wholesome, and it was cool to see like their relationship change from them not being able to stand this guy to them becoming brothers and just having that relationship that you should have on a team. It was really good. And then I got an arc of The Risk Taker, which I'm very grateful for. This is the third book in the Colton U series, and this is an MM romance, which that's something that I've been reading more and more of this year, and I've been loving them. I actually started this book, and there were characters mentioned within this story that were sounding familiar to me, and it turns out that I read a book previously within the series, so that was really cool to find out. But this is about Nathan and Logan, and these are two characters that are on the same hockey team in college, and you basically have like a straight-laced Nathan that is the coach's son that is very like, I would say type A, and is very rigorous about like his schedule and doing the right thing and, you know, not deviating from the norm. And then you have Logan that I would definitely say is a type B and is more of like the happy-go-lucky silly guy that doesn't take a lot of things seriously and is just trying to have a good time. And within the story, you already know that Logan is bi and that he's semi had a thing for Nathan, and Nathan really is somebody that has never really like identified or thought about guys or decided whether or not like he liked guys or girls, but has always had this weird like interest within Logan. I will say that I really love the dynamic between these two characters. I thought that the author did such a good job on that. I loved their relationship and how it developed throughout the story, and the way that they were both able to lean on each other and confide in each other about these issues that they were having, and the way that they were feeling so much pressure on themselves in different avenues, and the way that that was affecting their lives. And then just dealing with the idea, you know, of being gay or bi and what that does to you and how you're able to tell people about what's going on with that and how you're viewed in that. I felt like that was done really well too. I love just seeing their relationship with the other characters in the story as well. I thought that it was really good. They had a really good core group of friends that you can tell were very close and were going to be there for each other, and that they could confide in and, you know, talk to. And just the dynamic of like the whole hockey team I thought was really cute. And then there was actually characters that were in this story that I feel like are gonna get a book, and if they do, I'm so sad for that. There were breadcrumbs of them throughout the story, and I was so intrigued by their dynamic, and I thought that it was really good. And then again, just seeing like previous characters in the story that were in a previous story and seeing like their dynamic and the way that they were, I thought it was so cute. I then picked up the next two books in the Mortal Instruments series, City of Ashes and City of Glass. I was just missing this world and decided to pick it up. I honestly only thought that I was going to read City of Ashes, but when I finished it, I knew I had to continue. I was just having such a good time in this world. I feel like it's very nostalgic, and even though I didn't read these books as a child, I could just feel like the 2010s energy and just the feeling that you would have at the age that these characters are, which is like 15, 16, 17, and it was just so good. And I was just enjoying again, seeing like Clary again and Jace and their dynamic. And if you've read the first book, the like plot twist that's in it and the way that that was explored, I was just so interested in that and seeing like how are you going to work through this? How are you going to like keep having relationships with these people? What are you going to do about these issues that you're having in the first book? And I feel like the author did like such a good job of revealing things like piece by piece and giving you like one puzzle piece and then waiting and then giving you another. It just kept me so invested in the story and wanting to really figure out like what is going on with these characters and what are all these plot twists that you're throwing at me and like what do these things mean. And just her foreshadowing was so good. And then within the third book, honestly, there's something, well, two somethings that happened that I was not expecting literally at all that for me changed the trajectory of the series. That book by far has been my favorite in the series, and it just made me so much more invested in the story and wanting to continue. So since I felt that way, I knew that it was finally time to start the Infernal Devices, and I've just been hearing so many good things about this series. I've heard that this is everybody's like favorite Cassandra Clare series. It's one of the best trilogies ever. It's one of the best love triangles ever, and that people were just so invested in it. And even if they read it like years ago, they still think about it. And so, coming off of the high of City of Glass, I decided that I was gonna pick up Clockwork Prince. I get these books confused so often. Clockwork Angel. I get these books confused, and honestly, the way that the story started, I was so interested. So I will say that if you have not read Infernal Devices or the first book, I'll put a time step. Please skip ahead. I don't want to give anything away. But I was really interested in this story. I thought it was so interesting. I chose not to read the back of it because I wanted to go in blind, and I feel like that was the right thing to do. There are so many things that were happening within the story that I would have never expected to happen, and if I had read the back, honestly, it would have given it away. I'm glad I didn't. But I will say that I love the female main character, Tessa. I thought that she was such an interesting character, and I thought her being slightly older than Clary and her having a different perspective on life was so interesting. She ends up moving to London because her aunt passes away tragically and is coming to meet up with her brother Nate. When she gets there, she basically meets up with these people that are saying that like, hey, your brother sent us to meet you and we're going to take you to him. Turns out that's not at all what's going on, and they are just like basically trying to get her to transform into something that she doesn't understand. And when that came into it talking about her being a shapeshifter, that's not something that I expected literally at all. Like, I had to make sure that I was reading the page correctly when it said that that's what she was, because I didn't expect that. And I just like the way that Cassandra Clare explored that as that being something that she was, and it being in the time period that it was so interesting. I thought it was just so creative, and I really, really loved it. And I loved really seeing like this character's growth throughout the story. I feel like you could tell that she was so used to her life being a certain way, and then having this up in her world and finding out all these things that she didn't know about, that being shadow hunters and demons and vampires, and her really trying to come to terms with like what was going on was so interesting. I will also say a lot of the things that were happening within the story did mirror a little bit, I feel like, of City of Bones, with that being, a young female character that's trying to figure out who she is, and, her having this dynamic with a family member that, in this case, she was actually really close to, and, like, what he did, if you've read it, I was really, really shocked by that, and that made me so upset for her, because you could just tell that she really, really loved him, and that he meant the world to her, and just the way that he portrayed her I thought was so so messed up. And I hated that she had to go through that. And then I will say the main male characters, Jace and Jim, I thought that they were really interesting. They were such different characters. Like, not Jace. His name is not Jace. That's from that's from City of Bones. That's what I mean. The characters in this, Will and Jim, I thought that they were such different characters, and I loved seeing their dynamic with Tessa. I felt like it was so interesting to see her having interactions with Will, which honestly reminded me so much of Jace. And then Jim, that was more like lighthearted and was basically like, honestly, now that I think about it, giving almost Alec similarities. I just now thought of that. But it was interesting seeing their dynamic with Tessa and their dynamic with each other, and just the way that they both viewed like being a shadow hunter and basically like having to take on things that are going on in the world and what they think about it, and just the way that like they also view Tessa, I thought was so interesting. And I will say so far, my favorite character within the two of them would be Jim, even though Will does give like similar characteristics to Jace. I feel like that's a part of the reason why, I wouldn't say I don't like him, but that if he's like that, I kind of see where you're going, and he's very, down-putting and is always thinking that like he did something wrong and is trying to like essentially like mess himself up. I don't know how to say it. Like, is always trying to like self-sabotage. That's the word that I'm looking for. He just really reminds me a lot of Jace. And while I love Jace, Will, in comparison to Jim, I was like, Jim, I feel like he is very understanding and is very much of an empathic person, and was really trying to like get to know Tessa and was not trying to like put her down. And I appreciated that about his character. I also thought that he was somebody that was very tough and was dealing with a very tragic thing that was going on with him. And just seeing him like push through that and work through these issues was so interesting. I will say too, like, I think that was called automatons. That's how they're written. I didn't expect that either. I didn't think that they were going to be robots. I don't know if that's the right word in the story. I just thought that that was such another unique concept to have within the book. Again, with it being in the 1800s also, I didn't think that there would be any type of technology like that. That element to the story was so intriguing, and it just made me so much more excited for the next book. I then was craving a little romance. If you know anything about the Mortal Instruments series and Infernal Devices, it's more fantasy forward, which I have no problem with. There are like smidgens of romance, but I was just missing romance, so I said naturally I'm going to pick up a dark romance. And I had a book that I had downloaded to my Kindle called Devil on Skates, and it was a quick read. I will say within this story, I don't know that I really love the dynamic between the characters and the issues that were going on. I felt like I had to keep checking to make sure, is this actually supposed to be a dark romance? Because I don't think it's marketed like that, but it definitely is a dark romance. You have a main male character and a female main character that end up sleeping together one night and like hit it off, and then they basically don't know each other's names. They end up not going to the same college. They end up like meeting up again, and you find out that the guy is the player to her father's team, the hockey team, and that she's the coach's daughter, but that her dad is trying to set her up with some like guy that is rich, and that she has to like essentially have a relationship with him, and so she's not talking to this other character. And I feel like because of that, and the way that the guy was acting, and the way that he like interacted with the female main character and kept like sabotaging her, I really didn't like that. I felt like it was very insta lust, and I could tell that like the guy was just obsessed with the female main character, and I was really not understanding why. It just seemed like he really wanted to be a dick and just like mess with her relationship, and because he was doing that, that was affecting things that were going on in her life. And then he was also having issues with his parent. And I will say one of the things that I don't love within books, even though I know that this is like a real life thing, is when the character dynamics with their parents are like so horrible, where their parents treat them really badly, or are trying to dictate their entire life, or are giving them like ultimatums that I feel like no parent would give a child. For instance, like the female main character's dad gave her an ultimatum that she had to be with this guy because she was on her last chance, and that if she wasn't with him and it wasn't like a reputable guy that was rich, that he would disown her. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Whose parent is doing that? Let alone a hockey coach. I don't understand that. And then the main male character's dad was also horrible. He was trying to dictate like how his son acted and how he was on the team and just all of that. And I didn't really love it. So while this was a quick read and it kind of did give me like romance, it wasn't my favorite. I then finally picked up Sweet Venom, which I will say that I was not seeing the best reviews with on this book, so I went in with low expectations. I feel like that was a move. I didn't really enjoy this book. It was just okay, but I did tell myself that this and another book that I was really looking forward to, I wasn't going to read them until I felt them, and I'm glad that I did that, because I believe that if I read this book earlier or when I wasn't feeling it, I would have disliked it more. I will say that the reason that like I didn't like this book is I didn't like the characters' dynamic. I didn't like the pacing of the book. I also wasn't very invested at all in what was going on. Like, I could literally care less, so it's taking me out of the story. And then I feel like the female main character's like self-deprecating attitude and just the way that she was about literally everything, I didn't enjoy. She was very, I would say, depressed and had like suicidal ideation. And while I knew that that was going to be in the story, I felt like it was literally everything that was going on, she tied back to that. And then the main male character, like his motivation for having issues with the female main character, I felt like were understandable, but the way that he went about it, I didn't like at all. I didn't think that it made a lot of sense, and it just made me dislike him a lot as a character. I will say that the breadcrumbs of Preston that we got in this book were so good. I just enjoyed it so much. I thought it was amazing. He was by far my favorite character in this book, and he kept me so invested in the story and made me want to keep reading on. And then seeing the sprinkles of Kane and Dahlia in this book were also really good. Also, too, the way that this book went, I feel like half of it was before Beautiful Venom even started, and then the other half was after an event that happened in Beautiful Venom, and I also didn't really like that. I feel like that just really was like a waste of time within the story, because you already know like what happened and why these characters are in the position they're in, so it just took me out of it. And lastly, I read King of Gluttony. This was a book that I was looking forward to because it was Rivals to Lovers, and I've said before, that is my bread and butter, and I was so interested in reading this book. I've only read like one other book within this King of Sin series, but when I heard about the description on this, I was so interested. So I actually just finished that book. I didn't really love it. It was again another like an indifference towards the story. That's kind of how I felt about Sweet Venom too. Like, it was just there, and I didn't really necessarily care like about the characters or what was going on within the story. I feel like within this was about Maya and Sebastian, and they are people that have known each other their entire lives. Their families are like hugely intertwined, and they basically went to the same boarding school, and just have had this rivalry for years and years and years. And so in the beginning, I was interested in it. I thought it was so interesting. I love that like it was talking about marketing and these two families being within the food industry, and then basically collaborating on this project that they were going to put out to the world. And I could see that that was like obviously the way to get these two characters together. I think it was pretty apparent throughout this entire story that Sebastian had loved Maya for forever, and Maya just didn't realize it. And seeing that dynamic, I thought that was interesting, because typically, you know, it's the other way around where like the girl has always loved the guy and the guy didn't notice, but I feel like it was pretty obvious that Sebastian liked her. I thought in the beginning their banter was really good. I was really loving that. I just feel like that ended way too soon, so it was taking me out of the story. And then there are these like random scenes that were in the book that I just was having a hard time believing. Like, I understand it's a story and that they're not believable, it's not real, but it was like so unbelievable that it was taking me out of the story and making me lose interest. And then like these little like mystery elements that were in it, whenever they were getting revealed, it wasn't as, you know, like hard hitting as I wanted it to be. It would just seem like it was kind of talked about and like thrown in there to get you intrigued, and then kind of forgotten and then brought up again. and so that wasn't my favorite. And then I'll also say, like, the pacing of the story wasn't where I would have wanted it to be. I feel like the things that were being talked about, it was either too long or too short, and so it's taking me out of the story. But I will say that again, there are breadcrumbs within the story of the character that I think the last book is going to be about. And if it is about him, he seems really intriguing, and it will be a story that I'm interested in picking up. So those were the 16 books that I read in April. I had a really good mix of like romance, dark romance, fantasy, and I love that I was getting back into my fantasy era. I have missed it. I have not liked the fact that I've not picked up as many of this year as I wanted to, but I just have not been feeling it. But I feel like Mortal Instruments has just reinvigorated that love for fantasy, and it's just making me want to literally read as many as possible.